Hi, thanks for coming. Today we're going to be speaking about the three major programming innovations, as the title says, that affect station profitability. And my fervent hope is that we give some real take-home to you guys today. So one of you asked if you can take notes and if there'd be stuff to take notes on. I hope so, because I hope when you get home you can really use this. There's things that we're going to talk about here that have really made a difference in stations' profitability, and you can do it for yourself. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And I got to tell you that in these three innovations, they're not all of which I'm involved in, but I've been observing, which I have liked to do on innovation, as Gary mentioned, for the last 20 years. And there's not a lot of real innovations in our business when you think about it. What I mean by innovations are those that have a major impact on ratings and revenue and profit ultimately. And when you count those over the last 2 decades, we might be talking about 10 in the whole time. So there's not a big laundry list I'm going to go through today. I'm just going to talk about 3, and I'm not going to talk about the ones that have been, but 3 that are coming, okay? And when you look back to one of them that I was involved in, obviously, was research coming on the scene the first time. I started a firm called the Research Group back in 1977, and as it got in, and the first time it started bringing music tests to radio stations, auditory music tests, some real innovation was going on there. In 1977, very few stations used research, and today almost everybody is. And I was in a meeting with Frank Cody the other day, who does the digital dial music testing, and Frank was remembering back to 1981 when he was at KBPI in Denver, and he said, you know, Bill and I got together, and Bill brought this weird idea of testing your entire music library to us, and we thought, wow, let's give it a try. And we went from number 8 to number 1 in Denver and stayed there for a long time. He said, stayed there till I left, until Frank left, which is probably true. Anyway, an innovation like that can be something that very few people have heard about at one time, and then 5 or 10 years later, it just seems to be the thing to do. Everybody's doing it. And I like to catch them on the leading edge, and that's what I want to share with you today, so you can get ahead of others, not just know about the innovation, but get ahead of the ones you want to go on. Get on them now before your competition does. When you think about an innovation, there are really 2 requirements for a meaningful, significant innovation. One is it's a really different way of doing something that you've been doing, a truly different way. And as a result, one of the commonalities is that when you're doing one of these things, you feel a kind of discomfort when you think about it. The common ways you've been doing things are comfortable ways, okay? And very often the reaction to one of these is, you know, that sounds kind of neat, but you know, the way I'm doing it is fine. The way I'm doing it is fine. And you'll probably have a little of that going on in your gut, at least, if not your mind, when I go through these today. They won't feel totally comfortable. I mean, when people thought about putting research onto their expense lines 20 years ago, it was an uncomfortable feeling. When people thought about spending $20,000 or $25,000 or more to test music in 1981, it was an uncomfortable feeling at first, okay? It's very natural that that be the way, because you're talking about a really different way of doing something. The second requirement is that it really have a significant impact on ratings, revenue, and profit. So when I talk about these 3 innovations today, they fit those 2 descriptions. The first of these you're going to be quite familiar with, I think, because you've heard a lot about it for a number of years, or various parts of it. I'm going to look at it with a different perspective, hopefully, that you can use. The second you are hopefully starting to hear about, but probably haven't heard much about it. In fact, most stations hadn't heard anything about it as short a time ago as October 1997. That's the first time it was publicized widely at all. The third is going to seem really strange to you. I mean, it's got to be kind of out there, and you're going to say, what, when you hear it? But it's a big thing, and remember, you heard it here first. So I'm going to run these points to illustrate a little bit on a little PowerPoint that I have on my computer, and we're going to start on this first slide. There's an interesting idea of I'm going to kind of tempt you to get interested in this all the way through, the $3 million slide here. I said that real innovations have significant impact on station profitability ultimately. They may improve the ratings, they may improve the revenue, but ultimately it's got to be on profitability. One of the three innovations we're going to talk about today has had a $3 million positive impact on a station that I work with. So heads up, guys, there's money to be made this morning in what we talk about. Let's first of all look at the first innovation. And one of the things I learned in business school was that when you look for real innovation, you look for convergence of trends. Not one thing happening, but a number of things, all of which coming together make something new possible. And that something new being a new way of doing something you have been doing. Okay? So I'm going to look for convergence of trends today and three different trends, and we'll start with one that you clearly know all about, and that is morning shows via satellite. Okay, this has been around for some time. And you immediately think of Howard Stern when you think of morning shows via satellite, because he was like the first guy. I don't know if he was the first one, but he was certainly out there in people's consciousness first. And Howard, you know, Howard has done pretty well. But let's look at all the shows. Let me give you a little roster here. Look at this. When you look at these on the slide, it's not just the Howard Stern show. It's Mancow Now out of Chicago, Bob and Sherry out of Charlotte, Lex and Terry on KTXQ in Dallas, John Boy and Billy from the Fox in Charlotte in a number of markets now, Ed and Dre Morning Show from QHT, Scott and Todd from New York, Imus in the Morning, of course, Ben and Brian from LA, The Grease Man, who's now moved over to Washington, Bob and Tom from FBQ in Indianapolis, Moby down in Atlanta, Tom Joyner and the Black Stations for ABC, Zippo in the Morning in ABC, Steve in DC, and they're coming out, you know, they're coming out every month. There's somebody says, hey, these guys are pretty talented, let's put them up on the bird and see if they can make some more money, if we can make some more money. They're becoming more and more available. So it's not just a matter of one guy talking dirty, getting big numbers. There's a lot of these shows getting big numbers. And the interesting thing to me about the morning show by satellite is that a lot of people at first poo-pooed it, right? They said, no, that'll never work. And when a show like this came into your market and people talked badly about it, said, no, that won't work, what was the reason? It wasn't local. It wasn't a local program. And therein lies the problem for a lot of people. They close their minds, well, it's not local, it's not going to work. But clearly, that's the thing here. It is working. I mean, if we look at Howard's numbers, let's just take a look at Howard for a second. Let me get the right slide up. This next one. If the talent is good enough, this is really the point, it doesn't matter if it's not local. If the talent is good enough. Now that's a big if. Not everybody has enough talent to overcome the fact that it's not locally done out of your market. But if we look at Howard Stern's numbers, here he is out of New York, and he's #1 in New York, 2554 persons. But he's also #1 in Philadelphia, and I just grabbed places all around the country. He's #1 in Orlando. And he's #1 in Los Angeles, non-ethnic, non-Spanish. The Spanish station comes on top. But he's got a 6.5. He's really the #2, 2554 persons, #1 non-ethnic in LA. So, and it's not just Howard Stern. Here's a guy that we have on in a station that I work with, John Boy and Billy, out of Charlotte, in Greensboro, #1 with an 11.4. And that's 2554 persons. With 2554 men, they're like a 15 or 16 share. I mean, it's just awesome. So the idea of you got to be local or you won't win is clearly not right. I mean, it might have been a comfort zone for us at one time, but it clearly is not right. These shows are doing marvelously, many of them, and it's proving a fact that if the talent is good enough, it doesn't matter if it's not local. And of course, people are making up for the lack of local by putting in local news, local weather, local traffic, so it's not like one of these shows has to be without localism. It's just the guy's not coming out of there. Hey, David Letterman doesn't come out of Dallas. David Letterman comes out of New York or LA, whatever he is. And so and he's good enough, it really doesn't matter. Nor does it matter with Howard Stern or others. And that has been proven to us now, so we're kind of ready to accept that idea. This is just one trend of three that's going to work towards the first innovation I'm going to talk about. Let's look at the second trend that is happening, and that's the cost per gigabyte of hard drive storage going down, the cost of hard drive going down. I've had, in the last 4 or 5 years, I've had 3 laptop computers. The first laptop I had was an IBM, I still have it around somewhere, I haven't thrown it out yet, an IBM ThinkPad. It cost over $7,000. It had pretty good speed and pretty good storage capacity. It weighed about 9 pounds. It was a pretty good computer. The next one I bought about 3 years ago was a Toshiba 650 CT. Pretty lightweight. It was about 7 pounds. It was a little faster and a little larger storage capacity than the IBM, and cost $4,000. $7,000, $4,000. The latest one I bought is right here. I'm looking at this PowerPoint presentation on it. It's a Toshiba Libretto. It is faster and has more storage and more RAM than the IBM did a few years ago, and and weighs 1/4 the weight. This is 1.8 pounds compared to the 9 pounds, less than 1/4 of the weight. This costs $1,500. It's just exemplary of the movement, the change we've had in the cost of computers. In fact, you probably all heard the story, I think it's actual fact, that if the same technological advance had been made in automobile technology as was in computers, you could buy a Lexus for $2. It would go the speed of sound and get 40,000 miles to a gallon. And it's the truth. I mean, these big advances have been made, but the kind of advances I'm really talking about, the ones that you care about, are hard drive storage costs, which have been going down and down and down. Hard drive storage for storage of music, the songs, even if you have 3 stations, by the way, if you have a song on a hard drive, all 3 stations can be accessing it at different points simultaneously. It's really amazing. And storage of spots and storage of voiceover work, okay? So now we get to a point where we can have voice tracking, announcers voice tracking. And the common rule is that if you have a good voice tracker, a guy going in to do a show, he can do a 4 or 5 hour show, as this shows, in about 45 minutes. Okay? So it takes 45 minutes of his time to do 4 or 5 hours. And let's look at ultimately what that could mean. Let's say you had 3 stations, A, B, and C. And you had 5 really good jocks, not 15, but 5. And you had morning shows on station A, B, and C that were all done either locally or you were piping in a morning show from satellite. But the other 20 hours you wanted to fill with really good jocks. Well, jock 1 could voice track station A in 45 minutes, then voice track station B, maybe changing his name and changing the day part that he's on in another 45 minutes, and then do station C. So in 3 hours, he's voice tracked a total of 15 hours for your 3 radio stations, and those 5 jocks could handle 20 hours on your 3 radio stations for the price of 5 good people. Good product, less expense. So you start to see with the power of low-cost hard drive the kinds of things that can be done. Now, at the top of the slide here, I have voice actors, and any of you who have done this know that there's a big difference between a lot of guys out there, and ladies, who are kind of voice announcers. You know, they go on and they get, I don't know why, but they get sounding very stiff when they do the voice tracking. It just gets to be, you know, hello, this is, and it's just, robotic, it's mechanical. But there are some people who are marvelous, who can do it wonderfully. And I call those voice actors. You know, they're not announcers, they're actors. They can act just like that natural, real, casual sell that you want on most formats today. And be cool and hip and blend in jingles and have a good time with it, you know. But those people are rare. So we come to, and there may not be a lot in town that you are in. But now we come to the third trend that affects the innovation. Let's look at it. And that is transmission speed improvements. I mean, transmission of data, of sound files, wave files, whatever, has speeded up significantly. And we have here today already, and a lot of people are using this now, ISDN or wide area networks. So you can get lots of data out quickly. And on the horizon, of course, is the real effect of fiber optics, satellite transmission of computer feeds. So you can get the data. Not only can you put it into storage cheaply, but you can transmit it quickly. And more cheaply, because the cost of telephone lines and the time on telephones is going down, as you witness. So you have the ability to store it quickly and get it fast. And as soon as those 2 trends come together, there's an interesting thing, even without fiber optics here, the fast downloads, the cheaper phone service. You now are combining these 3 things: morning shows by satellite, cheaper hard drive storage, ability to transmit a lot of data quickly. And look what that could bring you. Here's kind of an odd situation. I know this will seem odd. Let's say you're a station in Indianapolis or St. Louis. You could be getting your morning drive from New York, your dry voice liners, you know, just the voice from some guy in Atlanta, whereas up in Seattle, up there in the corner, they're producing it. You know, it's emailed or whatever up to them. They do production around the voice, and get you the voice in Indianapolis or wherever you are. Your music could come from Dallas, all hard drive loaded. Your middays could be done in Denver, commercial production in L.A., a PM drive guy in Detroit. You've got a radio station that comes from all these remote locations because you have quick transmission of data and you have cheap hard drive storage. So you say, well, that's nice, maybe the product could be a little better, maybe I could save a little money, but what's the big deal? We're already doing pretty well, our ratings are good, everything's fine. You're getting into the comfort zone, okay? These things, these new innovations naturally challenge people's comfort zones. And the idea of the way I'm doing it now is fine is a tremendous temptation just to stay there. But think again, let me describe the way this innovation might affect you someday. A station across the street from you, maybe the second-rated urban or the third-rated country, gets sick of losing. They're not getting bought, they're not getting the numbers, and they're just tired. Do you have a market where somebody's not really happy with, probably, there's so many stations in a market, there's usually one or two guys aren't too happy with the way things are turning out. So that station gets bought by, let's say, Capstar or some company that really understands this innovation. And a week later, as soon as the deal is done, a week later, on comes John Boy and Billy in the morning, voice tracked from good people all over the country, cheaply. You have a wonderful product coming at you in a week, just like that, where they're spending very little on the product, relatively very little on the product, and they can spend it on promotion. Suddenly they're spending it on promotion, so you've got an attack coming at you with a good product, well promoted, and they're running it cheaply. Now that's interesting. When you put those three trends together and you think about the real possibilities of that innovation either working for you or against you, you might look at that differently. So, and right now this stuff, they're talking about it in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and Four Corners, New Mexico, and Killeen, Texas. But think about the applications that a smart operator might consider, okay? It could signal a kind of a next generation approach because, as I said here, it's a different way to program. It's a different way to do something you've been doing, totally different way. When I started the research group in 1977, almost no one was doing research. Very few radio stations were doing research. And today it's like accepted practice, if you're in a competitive market, you got to do some kind of research. You got to do music research or strategic, perceptual research. It's just a given. Back then it wasn't a given at all. So the way we think about walking through an innovation and how we react to it, whether we're going to kind of bury our heads and say, yeah, the way we're doing it now is fine, or not, is totally up to you. And the good innovations seem foreign at first, but they can have a big impact. So I simply would like you to think about these things now. Think about what you could do with them or how you could defend against them so you'll be on the edge. The bottom line of this innovation, I think, you say, well, what's the big thing here? The way to think of this one is that talent, we all know talent drives ratings, right? Talent drives ratings. Good talent, good ratings. Good product, and good ratings. What's new is that there is no geographical limit to your abilities anymore to get good talent because you have the high-speed transmission and you have the cheap hard disk storage. No geographical limitations to getting great talent. The second big thing is an innovation that was born of a need. And it's a need I personally got involved with and know about because I've been doing these things for 20 years. So I'm going to tell you a little story. Library testing of music has been done since 1981. Actually, we were experimenting with it for a couple of years before 1981 and then brought it to our clients at the research group in '81. So in '81, the research group introduces auditorium, and that's how it was done, in auditoriums, testing of entire music libraries for the first time. There had been call-out, you could test a few records here and there, but for the entire music library, this is on a focused, group of people who make sense to the station, this was the first time it was done. That was 1981. The new technology today that I'm going to talk about as innovation number 2 is interactive technology. But let's think about 1981. In 1981, the number of cellular telephones was 0. Today, it's more than 20 million. In 1981, there was no email, and today there are over 40 million email addresses being used, and used a lot. In 1981, there was no voicemail, and there were virtually no fax machines. 1981 was a long time ago. And a lot has changed technologically in communication since 1981. So when you're talking about auditorium-based testing, that technology, you're talking about a very old technology. And it has had, I've witnessed over the years, some serious growing problems. They get worse every year in auditorium technology, which has spurred me 4 years ago to start experimenting with a totally new technology, this interactive technology. But before I talk about those problems that we looked at, I'd like to talk about why this stuff matters, talking about it all, and how could it have an impact on profitability and ratings. I want to show you a fact, and then I'll show you why it's a fact. Fact is that good local music testing can boost ratings considerably, and better testing can boost them even more. Let's take a look at why this is true. I picked up a book before I came to the R.A.B. I picked up a book off the shelf, a strategic study, a perceptual study. And those of you who have one can go and pull out a book of yours off the shelf, and you'll see this exact same thing. Different numbers, but the exact same principle. I opened up the book to the first page, which in our books is what radio station do you listen to most? The favorite, the P1 radio station of this group. And this was a I believe it was a 2554 study, and cross-sectional study in the market. And here are the numbers. Station A, I didn't list them all here because there's like 20 stations in the market, or 25. But Station A had a 13.3, B had a 9.7, C had an 8.7, etc. So that's the most listened to vote. Now, most of you who do perceptual studies look at the perceptions of the radio stations, what images are in the brand folder of your radio station. So you look at images. We did the same thing here, and you know, there's all kinds of images you can look at. I usually look at 5 or 6 or 7, and sometimes 10 and 15. One of the more common ones is who has the best morning show? Who has a morning show that's really fun and entertaining to listen to? Another one is who plays a lot of music without a whole lot of talking? Okay? Another one is who plays the best songs for your taste? It's interesting, and you can calculate this, it's interesting to look at the correlation with each image against this table of who they listen to most. Let's look at one such correlation, and I'll show you what I've got here. There's 3 columns of numbers. The first is just what you saw before. The one on the left is who do they listen to most? See, remember those numbers, 13.3, 9.7, 8.7? Those are just from that last slide, okay? That's station A, B, C, D, E. Now, I've stacked up right against it who has a really fun morning show that's entertaining and fun to listen to. And those are the scores. And you can see that station A, which rates very well, must have a really good morning show, right? Station B seems not to have that. And look at station E. I mean, it has a 6-1 in preference, in P1 preference, or most listened to vote. It has a 2-1 when it comes to a good morning show. It's not doing it with good morning show. But what I did was I just looked at the differences. This is kind of a rough idea of getting a correlation. I looked at the numerical differences between the 2 columns. See, so I said 16.8 minus 13.3 is 3.5. And then 9.7 minus 6.3, the difference. I'm not looking at plus or minus. I'm looking at the distance the numbers are from each other. That's the heart of correlation. Is a 3.4. Station C is pretty much in line. It's a 0.6. D is a 4 difference, and E is a 4 difference. So I add up all the differences, and for these 5 stations, I get 15.5 as a total difference. Okay. Now let's look at one other image. There's the most listened to vote again, same as we saw before, and now I stacked up against it who plays a lot of music with very little talk. Now station 1, or the first rated station with a 13.3, obviously has very poor images for playing a lot of music, but it's not hurting it. Because of all the other things it gives it, it's doing really well. So again, I can calculate the differences for each of the 5 stations. I come to 17.8. Okay, the last one is 15.5, this is 17.8. Now let me put up a comparison to who plays the best songs for your taste. Okay, got that same column on the left. I'm looking at the best songs. My gosh, it looks like I copied the first column damn near, doesn't it? Look at that. 0.4, 0.8, 1.2, 1.6, 0.4. A total difference of all 5 radio stations of 4.4 as opposed to 15.5 or 17.8. Okay? What do you have to draw from that? The correlation here is very close. The correlation in these other images, in fact, any other images you look at, you can look at, you know, who has good weather, who has good news, who has fun disc jockeys. It's nowhere near as close as the correlation between best songs and P1. In other words, best songs has a very strong causal relationship on who is considered their favorite station and therefore who gets the credit in Arbitron. Let's look at the next slide here. Here's the lesson. Nothing correlates higher to ratings, nothing, than the best songs image of a radio station on any station that plays music. We're not talking about news radios here, but nothing correlates higher to ratings than their best songs image. Best songs leads to ratings. So now the natural question, well, what leads to best songs? What really gets me? I mean, this is what I've been doing for 20 years. What can I do to get a better best songs image? Let's take a look at there's only two ingredients that go into, I think, getting the image for the best songs. You can talk about it with phrases all day. It doesn't matter. You got to really deliver. So what are you going to deliver? There's two things. Look at the second one here, good rotations. I make it my business to study rotations of stations all over the country every year to assess, of all the AC stations, who's doing best and what is their rotational plan, you know? How are their categories laid out? What are their spins? Are they doing a day and a day part for the powers? Are they doing a day and 2 day parts? I mean, I want to know exactly what those rotations are. And I advise my clients to go with the strongest rotations in similar strategic situations. So you got to have a good rotational plan. Then you got to have good music testing. I mean, what you're rotating depends on what your music test says you should have as powers, what you should have as secondaries, and what you should not play at all. Okay? So now let's go back to good rotations really comes from empirical understanding. That's the best way I know to get it. I look at the most successful stations, I see what they're doing, and I say, hey, let's do that. You know, I mean, it's pretty simple. They're getting the best turnovers, they're getting the best TSL. What's causing that? We got to assume that the clock has something to do with it. Then we go to what causes good testing. What kinds of things go into good testing? And that gets really interesting. The first and most important thing about good testing is good recruiting. A test is only as good as the recruiting. I mean, who you focus in on and how well you stick to that plan of focusing in on those people and don't let in any people that don't belong in that test, that don't know your type of music, that don't probably P1 to the kind of music you like, who really prefer it over all other types of music. That's where it matters. And here there's an interesting little story too. There are a very small number of Class A recruiters in America. And these Class A recruiters are national, fairly good-sized national facilities, national recruiters and supervisors who work out of central facilities. Okay? They're not the little local companies that almost everybody uses, has to use, for auditorium testing. These national recruiters, there are 5 or 6 that are the best in the country that are rated Class A. We developed a classing system of them at the research group, and they are wonderful. They validate all the time. Their work is impeccable. I mean, it's marvelous work. And the whole idea of these people is that they just don't turn out anything but perfect work. And the interesting thing about this is that at the research group, we tried on many occasions to have them recruit auditorium tests. And you know what happened? What did they come back with? They said, please never give me one of those again. It's a horror show. I never want to do that. It is impossible to get these people to come out to these auditorium tests. We're pulling our hair out. Don't do that again. Now, I've used these people for 15 or 20 years. They do all the strategics, but they would never do an auditorium test. Except maybe we'd suck them into it once, and that was it for the next 5 years. They'd, please don't do that. So these guys that had the perfect record of validation never had a problem. Incredibly good supervision. That's their key, by the way. Incredibly good supervision. And by the way, we tried at the research group to do our own phone center. It was right in Colorado Springs where I live. It was a big phone center. It was well run. Watch out for that. I'm not talking about that kind of thing, because what happens in those radio research company having their own phone center is that there is an incredible dip, a valley and height in the, what would you call it, a curve, a demand curve through the year. And there's nothing happening in like October, November, December. It's dead. There's nothing happening in radio in May, June, and early July. As a result, it is impossible to keep the good people with you because there's no work in those 2-3 month periods. It's in the peak periods where the demand is incredible and then it goes right down. The best companies, the best recruiting are only those companies that have countercyclical businesses, a lot of them, not just radio, and can keep the really wonderful people all year round. So there's only 5 or 6 of these guys in the country that have A ratings. The problem is they couldn't get real listeners, which is all they could call, because they're calling at random. When they call totally at random. They couldn't get real listeners to come to auditorium tests. Do you know how we had to always do auditorium tests, and everybody does? You had to go to local supervisors. And local supervisors, God bless them, would get that test done. They had to get that test done. I mean, they had to get that test done in 3 weeks. They had to have everybody there that night, or it was disaster, right? I mean, one of those things blows up. It can be months to get it fixed. So they worked from a database that they had in their office, all of whom are people who had pre-agreed to come to do research, any kind of research, you know, on hosiery, candy bars, rugs, whatever it happened to be, as long as they were paid well for it. They had already pre-agreed. You know, they were met at a mall intercept or something and said, hey, did you like this thing we ran you through? Would you like to do it again for, you know, if we were paying you 25 or 30 or 50 bucks? And, yeah, I'll do that again. So they become professional test takers. Now, that database hopefully is called at random, okay? And they're hopefully run through the screener the way they should be run through the screener. But they're professional test takers. They're not people at random. They're not real listeners. They're professional test takers. That was a problem we saw growing more and more and more. There are a number of things. Let me just kind of show you this first line on the slide. I can't do your auditorium test on the 21st because I'm already booked for a candy bar test that night. I mean, this is what you hear back. These are professional test takers. Here's the second kind of problem. Well, I don't want to go alone. Can I bring a friend? Now, let me tell you that it is virtually impossible to recruit any kind of a test that has a lot of females, whether you're talking AC or country, which leans female somewhat these days. It is virtually impossible to get a female to come out at night, even one of these professional test takers, without having one of their friends come too. So how does that work? How do they get friends? They say, okay, if you want a friend to come, give me the names of 5 friends, and we will see if we can get them, if they'll pass the screener. So they call the 5 friends. Now, the motivation to get someone to pass the screener at this point is incredible, because you're either going to get 2 or 3 or 4 people who will know each other, of course, or you'll get nobody, because nobody wants to come alone, particularly the women at night. So, you know, it's like, you know, you like Elton John, don't you? You like AC, don't you? I mean, there's this temptation to coach. There's a real temptation to coach, and that's why about 30% of the library music tests in auditorium that we ever did, we would have problems with. We would have serious problems that would require maybe not total refielding, but finding the problem in advance, replacing them, trying to keep it away from this thing. But inevitably, when you got to the test, you know, your client would say, you know, it's amazing. All the people in this room seem to know each other. How could that be? I mean, I go to a restaurant. I go to a number of restaurants around my neighborhood. Now, I've lived in my neighborhood for 17 years in Colorado Springs. And it constantly amazes me as I go to a good-sized restaurant, I look around, I don't know anybody there. I mean, I know a lot of people, but I don't know anybody. I got to say, I must know somebody. I look around, I might see one person I know, but it's rare that I'll see 2 I know. Okay, so how is it? What's the miracle that gets people in an auditorium test? Everybody knows each other. It's not a miracle. It's referrals. It's called referrals. Getting friends, lots of friends in. Friends ruins the randomness of the test, of course. Okay, you're dealing with a neighborhood with all these people, know each other, and it also leads to a tremendous temptation on the part of the interviewer to cheat by coaching. Sometimes subtle coaching, you'll never find it in verification. You'll never find it. It's the subtle coaching that, yeah, I guess you can come, sure. So that was the second problem, is referrals. The third, when are we going to get out of here? That is the problem of fatigue. Because when you go to one of these auditorium tests, you know, it's not a simple little go-in, go-out procedure. You sit there for 1.5, 2.5 hours, sometimes longer. Some people take an intermission. They can go on for 3 and 3.5 hours sitting, listening to music. It's very fatiguing. This is not how people listen to radio, forced to listen for 2.5 hours. And when most people take an auditorium test, it's funny, we know from interactive, because in interactive, you don't have to sit there for 2 hours. In fact, nobody almost sits there for 2 hours. We have, the computer printout shows us exactly how long in seconds everybody spends in every time. The average number of sittings is 2 to 3. People take it in 20 to 25-minute sittings. That's how they do it. And it's just not natural to take it in 2 hours. It's a drag. So you say, well, why should I care about fatigue? What impact does that have? so they get tired, you know. They still take the test. Well, what happens is when you look at the scores in like the first hour of an auditorium test, they're artificially higher. They're kind of inflated because it's a kind of an event, this cool event. There's an excitement about it. You know, you register at the door. You can maybe get a door prize if you're lucky. It's, woo, this is cool, and everybody's around you. So the average scores are a little higher than the average through the whole test in the first 50 or so songs. Then the magic wears off. I mean, the magic really wears off, and it becomes pretty steady. But then the last 200 or 300 songs of the test, we find, and other organizations have found too, you might have read about that, that the scores start to really sink down in that last 200 or 300, just because of fatigue, not because they're worse songs, but because of fatigue. The average of the last 100 can be off as many as 7 or 8 points in a 4+5 score from the first couple of hundred. I mean, a really big difference. So fatigue really does matter. But in an interactive test, there is no fatigue. There are no referrals. There is no fatigue because all you got to do when you get tired, the respondent is just encouraged to just hang up. You get tired or distracted, just hang up. Come back and take it in another little sitting somewhere else. So they take it in comfortable little sittings over a 2 or 3 day period. And the reports back, we do research on these people all the time. And I could share with anybody who's interested a study of 500 people we did it on. Post getting paid, taking the test, getting paid. You know, they're just telling us what they think about it. They love it. It was easy. It was easy to take. Do you get tired? No. There were a lot of songs, but I was able to take it in short doses. Great. No problem at all. So the fatigue is gone. So the average of scores, even before another little innovation I'll tell you about was introduced, the average of the scores of any 100 scores through a whole interactive test remain virtually unchanged, just right along, very consistent, the average. So no you know, wave like this where the scores go way down. So we have the next item is, geez, you know, I've never been to a hotel ballroom filled with 75 strangers to listen to the radio. When was the last time you listened to radio in a hotel room with 75 strangers at 8 o'clock at night? It is just not real. There's nothing real about that. It's kind of weird when you think about it. It's kind of weird. The people like it when they listen in a more or less private environment. And when they listen in an interactive test, the vast majority of people, like 90% of the people, listen at home in a quiet room by themselves, which is a real environment. So you don't get hyped up scores, you don't get distractions from noise in the hotel across the way like we've had this morning. You don't have these things going on. It's a quiet environment. And you're not with strangers, you're by yourself. Here's that one little innovation I told you about that's kind of interesting. You know, when you're in an auditorium test, everybody hears the hooks in the same order, right? You start at 1, you go to 700. So the order bias that's caused by the fatigue, the last songs in the test definitely have a harder chance of getting a decent score than the early songs in the test. They listen 1 through 700 again and again, no matter what auditorium test you're in. In an interactive test, every participant hears it in a different order. To be very specific, the first person is programmed to hear it 1 through 700. The second person who starts the test starts at song 10. The third person starts at song 20. The fourth person starts at song 30, etc. So they're rotated. That's called rotating research. You rotate them all the way through. It totally eliminates song order bias. So not only do you not have fatigue, you can't have song order bias. It's perfect. It's wonderful. And they're all in lockstep. You can never get data out of sync. It is perfectly lockstep. Digitally loaded, digital loading of hooks, digital loading of titles, and digital scoring. The test cannot go on until a valid vote is registered by the party pushing a button. So what is, I've talked about some of the advantages. Let me tell you what interactive testing is, because some of you really don't know that. Interactive testing, now suddenly, these 5 or 6 wonderful recruiting firms, the very best in the country, can do this, and they are doing hundreds of them. Very, very successfully, because it's a lot easier to recruit a person to call an 800 number and take an interactive test than getting somebody out at night. And that's what they do. The people are called totally at random over the entire metro by one of the finest companies in America, which is impossible with an auditorium test. I mean, I can tell you that. I may not know a lot about a lot of things, but I know about music testing because I've been doing it for 20 years. I was there at the birth of auditorium, and I was there at the birth of interactive 4 years ago. They can and do a wonderful job on these, and they're doing them every day as we speak for stations that have gotten into this. They recruit them, then the person simply, if they pass the screener, they're simply asked to call an 800 number, they call free of charge, They are instructed on how the voting goes, what the 5-to-1 scale is, etc. And they take the test. And it's wonderful. They take the test just by voting a number by pushing a button on the phone. It's gut level. It's very much like the dial that Frank Cody uses, which I'm a big believer in. Very much like the dial, in that you're dealing with gut level, not all these semantic, crazy questions which, you know, let's see, do I like it a lot? Am I somewhat tired of it, but I still like it quite a bit? You know, these confusing, cerebral kind of answers. People listen to the radio with gut. You know, you're going to hit the button because you don't like a song, or you're going to turn it up because you do like a song. It's gut level. You don't think about it a lot. You're going to change a station, you just kind of gut level hit the button. And that's the whole idea here. Gut level hit the button. And it works. It's been wonderful to my clients who I've had. In fact, I've switched all of my clients but one to interactive testing, and the numbers are fantastic. Now let's look at one other little advantage, geographical limitation. When you do an auditorium testing, you're dealing with a hotel facility normally. And normally, you have one, but even if you had two, it would be the same thing. But let's say you just have one hotel facility. People come from a 5 to 8 mile radius. You can't get people from 20 miles away. It's not worth their time. They don't want to do it. Most people on an auditorium test, check it if you're doing one, they come from a 5 to 8 mile radius. Is that good? Well, the other thing here is interactive does it from the full metro. It can call all, and does call all over the entire metro. They're not limited. 5 to 8 mile radius is great in Casper, Wyoming. Casper, Wyoming is actually a pretty big county, but almost everybody lives in a 5 mile radius, okay? So it doesn't matter. There's no downside. But are you in Casper, Wyoming, or do you have a little larger market? Because if not all your population is contained in that 5 to 8 mile radius, you really have a neighborhood test. That's what you got. You got a neighborhood test. You don't have a market test. You want a market test, you go to the whole market, totally at random, the way you should with research. That's what research is all about. Totally at random, filling the entire metro and being projectable onto the entire metro. The other thing that's kind of neat about this is that those of you who are smart learned some time ago that the hot zips are much more important than the others. In fact, there are certain zip codes that you never, ever get a diary return from. Never. But there's maybe in your market 8 or 10 or 15 zip codes that time and time again give you the most credit, or you and your competitor if you've got 2 country stations, that are wonderful for country. Those are the hot zips. And you can find your hot zips just by running Report J and Maximizer. Zip, there they are, all in rank order, okay? If you want us to, if you give those to Music Technologies, they will call those totally at random and focus on those hot zips. In fact, you can say, I want them totally at random, but only in these hot zips. That's fine. Now, try doing a hot zip, fully random recruit with auditorium testing. It is absolutely impossible, and the difference it can make in the results and the ratings is real. I mean, I'm here to tell you it's real. So, last thing about it is control. When it comes to, I mean, we're talking about a better methodology here, an innovation that brings better technology and therefore better results. Control is the key to quality. And control is a very interesting thing. Some people ask me, well, how do you keep control? I mean, you don't see the people like you do in an auditorium. You're not there making sure they take it or don't fall asleep or whatever. And by the way, I've seen people fall asleep in an auditorium. And you know what happens if this is not a common control question, but you know what happens if a person falls asleep in an auditorium and you don't catch them? They go to sleep, and while they're asleep, for the couple of minutes you catch them, their score sheet is empty. And there's no way you can stop the test and go back, so you just keep going, and you have to guess at their scores. Now that doesn't happen very often, obviously. But by the way, by contrast, in an interactive test, if the person were to fall asleep, what happens? The whole mechanism stops. The system will not go on, the interactive platform system will not go on to the next song until a valid vote has been registered. So if they fall asleep, it just waits for them. That's all, it just stops. And if they fall asleep long enough, the line stops and they have to call in again and take another session. So, I mean, that's not very common. But here are the 2 really common control concerns, which everybody should be concerned about. The number one is person integrity, respondent integrity. Integrity means, do I have the same person taking the test all the way through the test? Or is it, and this does happen, a husband who's interested in the test talks to his wife and said, you know, I'd like to hear that. It usually happens towards the end of the test, but it could happen anytime, where the wife's taking it, she was recruited, she's really the one. It's an AC test for females, you know, age 35, 44, and she's taking it and goes along towards the end. She says, here, you want to listen for a while? And the husband takes it over. Now, that can't happen in an auditorium test. It can happen in what's called a living room test. That can happen. And they put control questions into living room tests to try to catch that. But so, will my wife know my social security number? I asked my wife at dinner the other night, I said, do you know my social security number? She said, yeah, 0203853. Rattled it right off. Do you know my mother's maiden name? My mother is deceased by probably 6 years. She said, yeah, do you know my mother's maiden name? Yeah, Wyman. Boom, did it right away. I figured, there's nothing that I would tell a research firm that my wife doesn't already know. I mean, my wife may not know certain things about me, but it's not something I'd write down in a research firm in a control question. There is no way in a living room test that you can be sure of respondent integrity. And you must have respondent integrity. You must. So in an interactive test, there's a wonderful way to catch any of that kind of cheating. We call it cheating because it's not following instructions. They're instructed that they will not get paid. And we pay. In an interactive test, we pay just like you're paid in an auditorium. We pay big dollars for you to be there, okay, because we want to recruit really good people. And they're instructed that they will not get paid unless they themselves personally fill out the entire test or take the entire test. Still, once in a while, it's very rare in AC and country, about 1% of the people cheat, but in young male alternative rock tests and stuff like that, the mates or friends, they want to get in on it, and they kind of weaken, and that's up to about 4 or 5% you get cheaters. You get people who turn it over to somebody else. But it's really easy to find. In fact, I have an audio tape today, and I'll show you exactly what it sounds like. What happens is, in an interactive test, a voice file is made, a voice print file is made all the way through the test at random points that pops up and says, at the sound of the tone, it's not controllable by the respondent, totally uncontrollable. It says, at the sound of the tone, please speak your full name and then press the pound sign. Beep. And they've got to start giving their name right then. If they get caught red-handed because somebody's wrong is taking the test, you can hear them saying, hey, get over here, get over here. Or you can hear them say, Joan Rivers. You can pick it up just like that. It's so easy to tell when they're cheating. And that is done at random intervals all the way through the test. Every time they come into a session, and it pops up between songs all the way through the test. They have to give their name. So there's a voice print record of every one. Let me play you first a voice print record of a person who took it right all the way through. You will hear no distractive atmosphere, and you will hear her voice. It's a lady who's taken it all the way through. The first thing you'll hear is a PIN number. A PIN number is how you get into the system. And then after the PIN number is identified, you'll hear the record, okay? The interactive company listens to every record, every single record, before the test is data processed. And anybody who cheats, the record is just replaced. Just, okay, recruit a new person. That person cheated, they're out. We don't pay them, recruit a new person. They don't lose anything by it because they don't have to pay them. So let me play here now first a good one.
950045222. Tracy Axtell. 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 Tracy Axtell.
God bless Tracy Axtell. She's in the test. She's clean, okay? Now let me play you one who's a cheat, okay? And as I say, they're rare, but you have to catch them when they're there. It's so obvious too. I mean, you'll hear a couple of correct voice prints, and then you'll hear the first cheat, and then you'll hear a second one. It happens pretty quick, so see if you can pick it up. And the second one, the husband or mate is saying, come on over here, give us your name. But it's kind of neat. Here we go.
950030122. Terry Knight. Terry Knight.
Terry Joe Knight.
No.
I'll just say my name. Say it right now. Terry Knight.
No, Terry Knight. Sorry, no. You see, I mean, come on over here. Oh, I have to say it now. I have to say it now. You can pick these people out so easily. Now, the second, that's the first form of control, respondent integrity. The second, and the only other thing that you want to control, is the environment. You don't want a lot of distraction going on, like a loud TV or a baby crying or things that are interrupting them. Now, when they get interrupted, like if the doorbell rings, what do? They're instructed numerous times to just hang up. So that's fine. You hang up, end your session, you go answer the doorbell. That's no problem. But people who don't follow the instructions, they're instructed to take this in a quiet room, and virtually all of the people do. This is very low incidence in what I'm about to show you. But some people don't follow the instructions, and they have the TV on loudly in the background or something going on in the background that could be distractive, and we don't know that they took that test totally conscientiously. So their file has to be pulled out and they have to be replaced. How do we hear into that? How do we get a window into that environment? When they give their name, there is a very short window. But what we have done just at the beginning of 1998 is to add what we call an extended window. So after they give their name, Bill Moyes, and they hit the button, the test doesn't start right away. There is about a 2-second gap till their next hook starts, and in that 2 seconds, I get to hear the environment. So let me play you what that extended gap sounds like that just started a short time ago. And you'll hear the guy give his name, and you'll hear a little dropout. That's where he gave the beep. And then you'll hear the background noise come out. I'll just play a couple of them here.
Jonathan Moore.
You waste half of the fruit, but on the bowl.
Jonathan Moore.
On the wedge cutter, place the cover on the
Jonathan Moore.
So you get the idea that he's got the TV on at a fairly decent level in the background. He could be being distracted, so now we have control of the respondent integrity, and we have control of the environment, because we have like a stethoscope in there all the time, which again, unfortunately, in living room testing, at the research group, we actually did and do, they still do, all three forms. We do auditorium testing with dials, and interactive testing, all the dependable. But they've never done, and will never do for a client, living room testing, because you have no control over respondent integrity, nor do you have, any control over the environment. You can't see into the environment. But with interactive, you can see into the environment. So, if you think about this new innovation and what it's bringing, you might say, well, that's interesting, and that may be a little better, and but you know, and these certainly sound like improvements on the auditorium testing, but you know, the way we're doing it now has been working pretty good, right? It's the old comfort zone again. Here we go. You know, the way we're doing it now is fine, and it's accepted. You know, the way having no research was accepted back in 1976. Okay, and then people started jumping ahead that had it, and you had to have it. So I'd like to have you think about that. No fatigue, totally random dialing, all over the metro, focused on hot zips if you want it, no professional test takers. What does all this lead? No order bias, real environment, real listeners, wonderful control. What does all this mean? Does it translate into good numbers? Well, I think if you look at this as though, yeah, that's just nice, it's not an important advance. But let's look at what's really going on. I had a case study, the longest case study I've had in this. I started experimenting with this 4 years ago. I used it on my own stations. I had a group of 22 stations, most of which is now Triathlon Broadcasting. I started using it with them 3 years ago, and 2 years ago I started using it with my own clients, and the very first of which was B101 in Philadelphia. An interesting thing about looking back 4 years ago in Philadelphia, in the AC arena, B101 is an AC station, there have been no competitive changes at all. No change in our budgets and what we spend in promotion, no change in the product. It's the same product, it's the same position, everything, same people on the air. For the last 4 years, everything has been absolutely steady, except the way we do the music. 2 years ago, we switched from auditorium to interactive. Here's the slide. In the 8 arbitrons, 8 books, before we switched, we had an average 25-54 female share. Didn't put that in the slide, but average 25-54 female share of an 8.29. Now we have had 8 books since that switch. Those 8 books averaged 10.0. The last book was a 10.9, 25-54 women, and that's a heck of a difference. That difference is worth $3 million. There's that slide again. $3 million, bottom line, in terms of what that station could do as a result of that ratings increase. So, you know, you sort of hear, yeah, the things I hear about it now in terms of people that are in their comfort zone, kind of digging their heads in the sand, is, well, you know, it's okay, but, you know, I've been told it's really not that much better than auditorium testing. And that's told to you by people you trust usually, and very often it's a research company that does what kind of testing? Auditorium testing, you know, I mean, they have something to protect. The facts clearly support that this is gets rid of all the problems of auditorium testing, has no problems of its own, has excellent control, and is the one way to use the 5 or 6 best companies in the world in terms of recruiting. Those people who have perfect records for sticking to the screener 100% and doing it right at random, totally at random, with no professional list, no database list. The other thing, you look at, well, what do you mean by facts? Okay, you understand the methodological differences. We switched, interestingly, 47 stations, 47, all of which had totally different competitive environments, okay? We switched 47 stations in the spring of last year from auditorium testing to interactive testing. The average increase in their 25-54 adult numbers, 25-54 adult, the one that turns into money, was 1/2 point. Average. Some of them went up 2 and 3 points, but the average rise was 1/2 point, 25-54. You know, and how do you look at that and say, well, it's really no better, it's about the same? If, you know, to me, I've been around stats all my life, statistics all my life. Going from a 6 to a 6.5, that's what we call better. 6 to a 6.0 is just as good, okay? We went up 1/2 point, okay? If we'd gone down, it wouldn't be as good. It went up. It is clearly better. You gotta be fooling yourself to call it just as good. And the other comfort zone is to say, well, you know, that sounds great and everything, and when it gets out of the experimental stage, and it's still kind of experimental now. Let me be clear on that. 4 years ago was the experimental stage. Everything goes through an experimental stage. 1979 was the experimental stage at the research group on auditorium testing. 4 years ago was the experimental stage on interactive testing. 3 years ago into real stations. 2 years ago into virtually all my clients. Today, they're all on it but one. Okay? So, if you want to kind of kiss it off as experimental, consider 3 things, okay? Let's look at numbers not only at B101, let's look at numbers from some other, I'm going to look at the 3 major adult formats that I work with in my company, and these are all clients of mine, so I understand their strategic situations. I can't speak to all of the clients of Music Technologies, which is the interactive company, but I can speak to these. AC B101, Cozy in Denver, #1 with an 11.4. I have lots of others, I'm just putting a few on here. Let's look in country. KNIX, up from #3 to #1, 25-54 adults with a 7.6, way ahead of its country competition. Before it was getting beaten by its country competition, Camel. Now it is beating Camel. WIVK struggling along at a 21.2, 25-54 adults with competition in that market now from WOKI. Still probably the highest rated in the top 50 markets in America, I'm quite sure it is. Kim in Tucson going from a 13.8 to a 16.5, 25-54 adults #1. Classic rock, Arrow 104.5 in Nashville now #2 with an 11.0 in men 25-54, its target demo. And KRR in Greensboro #1 with a 15.2 in 25-54 men. This is the whole day. I mean, you know, it's hard to say, yeah, it's only a little better. And if you don't believe that, think about those 47 stations. You know, I just cited, what, 7 here or so. Think about those 47 stations, average 1/2 point increase, 25-54. What's a point of 25-54 worth in your market? And the other thing that might jolt you is in 1998 at Music Technologies, they expect to do more music testing of music libraries than any other research company in the world. This is not at the experimental stage. If you think that, you're kidding yourself, or somebody's kidding you. This is real. It's here today, and it's big, and it's having a big effect. So, the last thing I told you about that I want to tell you about that I told you would be kind of a shocker is the old rule, okay, of how many music tests do you do a year? This third innovation, and I consider it such. It's a different way of doing things that I'm going to tell you about. Something you've been doing, but a different way of doing them, and has significant impact on the profitability of the company. The old rule is you did 2 tests a year. If you were in a competitive environment, 2 tests a year was fine. You know, we're doing it fine the way it is. 2 tests a year was fine. Now, the smart guys, by the way, in the very largest markets, the top 5 and 10 markets, are doing like 4 tests a year. Coda in Houston, B101 is doing 4 tests a year now. All the guys who are really in tough competitive environments are reaching for that extra point. You know what I call the tough ones. You may be alone in your format, but instead of a 7, you'd like an 8. So you're reaching for that other, and they're going to 4-year. Now, to me, 4-year is not really the answer. 4 years fine if you got, you know, money you don't care about. But 2 years is also not the answer. Let me show you here on this kind of graphically what the difference is between 2 tests a year and 3 tests a year. What the research indicates that we've done is that when you do that first test, let's say in January, if you did that, or it doesn't matter the month, but at 0 month, in the first couple of months, the target thinks, you know, I don't know why that station sounds better, but it is really good. The music is, I don't know, fresher or something. The music sounds better to me. They really like it. Then after that, they go through another 2-month period of thinking, it's pretty good. The last 2 months of the 6-month cycle, because you're doing it twice a year, so it's a 6-month cycle. The last 2 months is, you know, I can't quite put my finger on it, but it sounds kind of tired, kind of stale. Okay? And then if you do another 6-month period like that, you run into the same thing. So over the whole year, you have 2 2-month periods, or 4 months, where to people you sound kind of stale. You sound kind of stale. Now, what happens when you go to 3 tests? The stale periods go away. You don't have to go to 4 tests to get this. Get this now. I'm telling you not to buy 4 tests. I am telling you not to buy 4 tests. But I am telling you that the difference buying 3 tests can be tremendous, because you wipe out the stale periods. Particularly if you're in competition with somebody, they're going to be stale, you're not going to be. But even if you're not in competition, remember how well the best songs vote correlates to who they listen to most, who they spend the most time with and give their share to in Arbitron. If I can get rid of stale, since playing the best songs is so important, if I can get rid of the stale periods, haven't I made a great advance? Yes. I have tried it in my clients, going to 3 or 4 as opposed to 2. I don't think 4 is necessary, but I'll tell you, the difference when you do 3 and get no stale periods is day and night. So this is the thing I told you to kind of say, oh my God, you know, it is stepping out of the comfort zone. It is, hey, I'm sure the way we're doing it now is fine. We're rating well. This will make a difference if you want to take advantage of this innovation. It is an innovation. It is a basic difference in the way people are doing things, and it will have an impact on your ratings and therefore your profitability. So when I tell people about this, they say, well, you know, how can I do this, you know, or what can I do? And I said, well, the first thing you got to think of is you're investing in your radio station all the time. You invest some in product and you invest some in promotion. And what I found is that another $15,000 or $20,000 dedicated to making the product better can have a tremendous effect on ratings. The difference between spending $80,000 and $100,000 on TV, it's pretty hard to trace. If you have a good spot, $80,000 might do it, and $100,000 might be just, you know, overkill. But $20,000 for a 3rd test here, or $15,000, whatever it costs, that can make a heck of a difference. So invest in the product first is the tenet that I always tell them. But then they say, well, how can I pay for it? There are 2 ways that you can pay for it. One is add more budget. You know, if you've been spending $40 for 2 of them, you just go to $60 for 3. But there's another way, which I tell my clients, which I think is very wise. And that is, I say, how many people, and I'll ask you, how many people do you normally have in a music library test? What's a reasonable, realistic number of people? What do you feel comfortable with? I'm at 100. 100 is what I get fed back from people a lot. I don't know who started this 100 number, but you know, I do and have been doing for years replication studies. A replication study is a very easy thing. You do a test. Let's say you start with 120 people, okay? Start with 120 people. You look at the results in terms of the scores with 120 people in. And then you say, okay, let's take off the last 10 people that took the test. Just take them out, any random 10 people. Let's look at it with 110. Now let's go down, and the question you're asking as you look at these various stages is, have the results decayed at all, or are they essentially the same numbers? I'm not learning anything different. So you go from 120, 110, 100, 90, 80, 70, 60, etc. When you have a well-focused test, and there's no excuse, by the way, for not having a well-focused test. If you don't have a good focus screener, you're not being served well. You should have a highly focused screener if you want it. Good focus brings broad success. Read the focus book by R.A.B. Think about what you should be focusing on. You should have a focus screener. I've looked at focus screeners in AC, country, classic rock, you name it. I've looked at them in all of it. I've done the replication studies. Do you know where on a good focus study the data really starts to decay? At what level do you think it's 100? Do you think, obviously it's not 100 because 100 is safe, right? Most people think 100 is safe. 70, it's 50, 60. It actually starts to decay in the adult, highly focused tests I've seen at 35 people. 35, it doesn't decay till you get to 35 people. Now, I'm not suggesting you do tests with 35 people. You want to stay comfortably north of 35 people. Okay? So I never do a test less than 60. I mean, if I'm there, then I'm way north. I'm not going to have any decay at all. All right? And you say 60. Oh, gosh, how could you get away with 60? B101 in Philadelphia, that same station that has achieved all that, until very recently, 60 is the number we used in every single music test. We put a few more in because the money is coming out. They don't know what to do with the money. But the truth is, they've used 60. 60 brought them up. They have gone up for 4 years in a row, using 60 people in every music test. So one of the ways to be able to get another music test is to say, am I focused enough? Get focused. And say, how many people do I need? Instead of 100, maybe use 70 or 60 or 80. I don't care what, but you have an overkill. That's just a waste of money. The truth is, as you go up, the data stays exactly the same. You gain nothing at 100 people from 90. I'm telling you right now, anything north of 75, if you have a good focus screener, is a waste. It's the truth. Do 100 if you like. I have no problem with that whatsoever, but you're wasting money. So one of the ways to get 3 for the price of 2 is just think, how many do I need and how should I be focused on my screener? As I say, B101's been doing it with 60, and that'll shock a lot of people, but it's the truth. It's a different way of doing things, but it works. So the other choice, of course, is always to say, well, you know, let's just stay in our comfort zone and pray that the competitors won't learn about this stuff. You know? Pray that they will stay in the same. They'll be doing 2 a year. They'll be doing auditorium tests, and then you're okay. The truth is that smart people get out of their comfort zone. They think about, in a safe environment like this, getting out of the comfort zone. They learn all they can about it. They say, look, if I want to go ahead, if I want to stay competitive, I can't do things tomorrow like I've been doing them yesterday. So they take advantage of the new technologies, and they'll have an edge on the others. They'll be the real leaders. The edge is what the real leaders enjoy. Thanks very much. Appreciate your attention.